Welcome everybody to the 2000s presentation, and hopefully you enjoyed the 1970s and 1980s, 1990s. A lot of crazy things, good things happened in those decades, and the 2000s is no exception. And so this is the decade that, for me, it was finishing up college and uh, becoming a teacher and getting married and having a family, and so the 2000s was a big decade in my personal life, and I'm sure for a lot of your parents it was the same. And so hopefully you will enjoy learning about that time period. In the year 2000, George Bush Jr. is elected as our 43rd president. His dad, Bush Sr., was our 41st president and served um, from 1989 to 1993. And so when Bush Jr. gets elected, it's kind of keeping it in the family. And Bush Jr. oversaw some major things during his presidency, as you will see. Bush will serve 2 terms. He will officially be sworn into office in January of 2001, and he will leave in 2009. The Summer Olympic Games in Sydney, Australia also take place in the year 2000, and that was, of course, a big to do, like all Olympic Games are. Here is President Bush Jr. And like I said, while he's in the White House, a lot of big things worldwide will take place. And here's the logo of the Sydney Olympics and the medals from those Olympics, and pretty cool stuff. 2001 was a crazy year. Uh, on September 11th, the attack on the United States, uh, the trade towers, of course, in New York City were hit. Um, the Pentagon is hit in Washington, D.C., and we were told that um, an airplane was also bound for the White House. Uh, don't know if that's true or not. I mean, that's what we were told. That was the official story, but of course, it never reached the White House. Um, so 9/11, of course, has changed everything in the United States and really the world. We were told that it was a big terrorist operation, and again, that's the narrative. A lot of people have other theories about it, and people that have really delved in deep have uncovered some interesting things about 9/11. So I encourage you to study on your own and try to unearth what you can about that event. 20,000 dead from a massive earthquake in India. It was a horrible occurrence. And China enters the World Trade Organization. And in the years since 2001, we have seen just how big of a deal that was as we look back. Of course, so many things are made in China today and have been, for quite a while. So China entering the WTO was a big deal. There's the famous picture. Um, one one tower is got hit. It's been hit by an airplane. Another tower is about to be hit, and it just changed how we live in the United States. It changed how government is in our lives as well, and the degree to which that occurs. And so, 9/11, just a massive, massive, you know, deal, and the aftermath of it has been just as big, perhaps, or bigger than the event itself. And here's the map of the airplanes and their flight patterns that day. And so, kind of crazy as we look at it, but really interesting stuff when you study 9/11 and just all the nuances of it. And here's a picture of, one of the pictures of one of the areas that was affected by this earthquake, and you can see where it was in the far, far west part of India. Um, on the map there. In 2002, something really cool happened here in Salt Lake, and Salt Lake City and Utah as a whole was definitely a buzz over the Winter Olympics being held here. And downtown Salt Lake went through a transformation, and they had some of the events in Park City and other places throughout the Salt Lake Valley. So uh, pretty pretty cool stuff. I remember that very well, and it was pretty exciting time, especially to live here when that happened. Because of 9/11, the U.S. begins to attack in Afghanistan. We believe that elements of 9/11 were carried out by people from that region and by power, uh, you know, power brokers from that region, and that Osama bin Laden is hiding out in the caves of Afghanistan, and he was the one reportedly that orchestrated 9/11 and all this stuff. So we go after. That's our excuse, right? To attack in Afghanistan, and we stayed there for many, many, many years. Uh, Also, the Department of Homeland Security is formed, becoming the 15th department in the executive branch of government, and it's because of the Department of Homeland Security that everything changed as far as security in the airports and all different things like that. So definitely uh, the Big Brother state, if you want to call it that, kind of in reference to George Orwell's 1984 classic novel. That's kind of when this really starts big time here in the United States. Here's a picture of the Winter Olympics downtown Salt Lake and the ceremonies there. But the downtown was pretty dang cool during this time. So yeah, it was fun to live through. And the invasion of Afghanistan, and definitely our brave men and women who went over there put their lives on the line, no doubt. But many people have questioned the motive for going over there, and did we really need to be there? Was 9/11 really orchestrated by people there or a person there? And the debate will rage on forever over that, I'm sure. And then in 2003, the United States began its attack in Iraq. Uh, we had been there in the early 90s, of course, and in the first Gulf War, and we go back now, over a decade later, and our job is going to be to take out Saddam Hussein, and he is captured, okay, and he is basically put on trial by his own people and will be executed by his own people. Um, so the Middle East was just in upheaval, as you can see, after 9/11, and U.S. military forces are all over the place there. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger, a famous actor from movies, becomes governor of California. And the previous governor, um, was out, and basically it was between elections, and so a bunch of people threw their name into the hat that wanted to be governor, and Schwarzenegger won that, and so he becomes a pretty famous governor. Pictures of the invasion of Iraq, and it's kind of a street to street, house to house thing largely, and the people of Iraq tearing down Saddam Hussein's big statue, and you know we were in Afghanistan, in Iraq, early 2000s, and these countries are still, we're just we're we've barely pulled out soldiers from these countries, and we're still in the process of doing that completely all these years later, and these countries are still kind of recovering from that. So boy, the implications of us going there in the early 2000s were pretty immense, no doubt. And here's Schwarzenegger, the governor of California in 2003. In 2004, the 60th anniversary of the D-Day invasion of Normandy, France, in World War II occurs. And that was a really emotional time for a lot of the veterans who were still alive from World War II and have participated in that operation, and just for everybody. It was kind of a resurgence of remembrance of World War II and of D-Day. The Summer Olympics in Athens, Greece, are quite the to-do because the ancient Olympics were in Greece, of course, and the first modern Olympics in 1896 were back in Greece, and then to take the Summer Olympics back to Greece was pretty cool. George Bush Jr. wins re-election, and 2004 is when this enormous tsunami in Southeast Asia killed over 300,000 people, uh, injured countless others, ruined homes, and I mean, entire cities were wiped out, villages wiped out, infrastructure wiped out. The costs of this were just incalculable, and it was incredible. I just remember my wife and I were actually we'd gotten married in the summer of 2004, and we decided just before Christmas in 2004 we decided to take a big trip, and we went to Fiji. And so we were in the South Pacific, but we didn't feel or see any effects of the tsunami there. But of course, it was on TV round the clock, and the coverage was just expansive, and that tsunami was just unbelievable in its scope. All right, there's the some pictures and logo of the Greek Olympics in 2004, and the tsunami. Uh, some devastation there on the left, and I mean, can you imagine a wall of water like that's like concrete coming at you, like the picture on the bottom right? I mean, that just would be terrifying, and just it did not end well. Let's put it that way for those structures and that area. And then we had some devastation of our own here in the United States the next year. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina hits the southeast, especially into Louisiana, the New Orleans area. Um, we had some levees that that had the uh, people had been warning about these levees, these dams in New Orleans to that were holding the water back from the city, and they said these are not strong enough. If we have a big catastrophe, these are going to break. They're not you know good enough to hold back the water, and the city didn't do anything about it. And of course, the hurricane comes, the levees break, and some of the city gets flooded. You know, people lose their lives, lose their homes, neighborhoods are wiped out, businesses are wiped out. I mean, the effects were crazy, crazy huge. And of course, this is a national disaster, and the you know the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina we still see today because a lot of people in areas affected by the hurricane ended up moving because they had nothing left. All their belongings were gone, their home was gone, and so they moved from the southeast. And we had people come to Utah, and we had people go all over the place in the Midwest and the West to relocate, and some of them are still here. And so, of course, other people stayed and tried to rebuild. And but they're really 15 years later, they're still actually kind of redoing and rebuilding certain parts of New Orleans because of this hurricane. Condoleezza Rice becomes the first black woman to be Secretary of State. So that was kind of a historic moment. And John Roberts becomes the new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The head of the Supreme Court is called the Chief Justice. The Supreme Court of the United States has 9 members, and the head of those 9 is the Chief Justice. And then the legendary civil rights activist Rosa Parks passes away in 2005. You can see kind of what Hurricane Katrina did to certain parts of the city of New Orleans, and I mean, just devastating. It was crazy. You had people on the rooftops, calling for help, calling for some, helicopters to fly by and save them as the water levels rose. And I mean, obviously the streets are waterways, right, in parts of the city. So, of course, it was some of the most poor parts of the town that were most severely affected, which was horrible. And yeah, crazy. There's Condoleezza Rice on the left, John Roberts on the right, and they, made history in 2005. And then in 2006, the World Cup happens in Germany. Every 4 years, the world's biggest sporting event, the World Cup soccer tournament, takes place. And um, it's the biggest sporting event, of just one sport. It's bigger than the Super Bowl. It's bigger than the NBA playoffs, the World Series, because you know some of the those sports also have international appeal to some degree, but the World Cup is the biggest. Soccer is the most played sport in the world, and so people, you know, billions of people are watching the World Cup, and so it's a big deal. Fidel Castro, the longtime dictator of Cuba, transfers power to his brother Raul in 2006. Castro deemed himself too old to continue to be in power, and so his brother takes over. The damage that Castro did to Cuba over the years as the communist dictator, was immeasurable, and Cuba was thrown into the dark ages, like all communist countries are, and it was just terrible. But Cuba has sort of reopened now to the world a little bit, in the last couple of years, and uh, but man, it's going to take a long time to undo the damage that was caused. Scientists come out and say that Pluto is no longer a planet. And it's kind of funny, we're like, what's the big deal? Well, we'd always been told, well, we have all these planets in our solar system, and now Pluto is no longer a planet. It's this dwarf planet type thing, and we were like, whatever, right? I mean, if it was on my mobile in fourth grade, of the solar system that I had to make, then it's a planet, right? So, and then social media for the first time kind of becomes a big deal. And remember, the internet really kind of got mainstreamed by the mid to late 90s. And so by the mid 2000s now, MySpace comes out as kind of this predecessor to Facebook and Twitter and all the social media platforms of today. But uh, MySpace comes out, and then MySpace has gone the way of the world. But YouTube came out, of course. YouTube still dominates in a lot of ways. A lot of things on the web. So one has stayed around and one has gone from those 2006 days. But that was kind of the intro to the internet as we know it, if you will. And there you go. There's Pluto, and of course on the right, that absolutely is a real sign placed on Pluto. Pluto for planethood. Um, and if you believe that, then I have some oceanfront property that I'd like to sell you here in Utah. So anyway, but yeah, that was. I mean, we're like, yeah, of course it's still a planet. It was a planet all our life. You can't just say it's not a planet now. And so it's been kind of the I don't know. It's been kind of fun to just you know jab scientists about, I guess, over the years. And then MySpace, that's what it looked like. YouTube, of course, basically still the same, but these start to dominate the web in 2006. In 2007, the economy starts to take a big hit. We have the mortgage crisis in the U.S. Too many banks and the credit unions had given people really crazy loans for houses. A lot of people were in houses they could not afford, and their loans were structured so that they could, potentially afford them or afford them for a while. And while the interest rates were low, and then once an interest rate went up on a loan, the people would have a hard time paying for it. But this allowed people to get into houses that were way over their heads as far as the salary they made at their job. And so a lot of people had to default on the loans. They couldn't make payments, um, and it just was a catastrophe. So houses were being foreclosed, and these banks are stuck with these, now these houses. They can't can't always turn around and resell them, and it was a mess, and it just shows in a lot of ways, and I'm sure there's more to it, than what I'm telling you, but it shows in a lot of ways the how devastating it is when people are not um, smart with their finances, and when institutions are not smart with their finances. The last Harry Potter book is released in 2007. J.K. Rowling hit the jackpot, made a fortune uh, off writing these books, and of course the books uh, were made into movies, so she made gobs of money off the movie rights, and but these books were immensely popular worldwide, and every kid that grew up during that era, um, was reading the Harry Potter books. The shooting at Virginia Tech University was shocking. Disillusioned kid shooting up the place, and it was just horrible. But again, these types of things started to happen more, and it just, people just were so shocked by it, but also just, I mean, it was really disheartening that society had become like this in a lot, in some ways. So uh, anyway, it was a crazy event, and it doesn't seem like it was nearly that long ago as I look back on it. Uh, and the iPhone is announced. People had flip phones. Everybody had a flip phone, and of course you could take pictures with it, and they weren't very good, but they were pictures, and you could text, but it took a long time to text, and things. Um, I actually personally loved my flip phones because I thought they were kind of fun, but then the iPhones are announced, and that's really this when the smartphones start coming out, and the screens are bigger, and the picture quality and resolution is better, and texting is 1,000 times easier, and these things can hold all kinds of data. They basically become computers in your hand, and that's what you've all grown up with, and that's all you've ever known. But man, I'll tell you, the iPhone really that changed phones and technology for sure. And there is the last Harry Potter book, and there's J.K. Rowling. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, uh, when he was still with us, introduced that iPhone. That's what the first iPhone looked like in 2007. Of course, they've had a bunch of iterations since then, and Steve Jobs has passed away as well. But yeah, the iPhone was transcendent. It was groundbreaking for sure. In 2008, Barack Obama is elected as our president. He is um, he's a mulatto. He was born to a black father, a white mother, and so he's considered our first black president in the U.S. And that, of course, made history. Apple hits the jackpot. I should say launches the App Store, and the App Store is where you could go and buy. You could get apps, and some for free, some were for you had to pay for. Um, the the music will eventually come around with the iTunes, and of course it takes Apple to another level. Apple was starting to dominate the phone world at this time, and of course Androids were around too from different companies, but Apple really was banking with the App Store and iTunes that will come around later. Um, and then the Summer Olympics in Beijing, China happened in 2008. And there's President Obama, who had been a junior senator in Illinois, and uh, is backed by some pretty powerful people and pretty rich people in his bid for the president, and he wins. He wins the election, and uh, and history is made. And here are some pictures of the Summer Olympics in Beijing, and just the elaborate ceremonies and the firework displays, and it's crazy because every Olympics tries to outdo the previous one, and so uh, the the special the special things that are planned for the opening and closing ceremonies are just, I mean, they're over the top, but they're pretty dang cool too. And to close out the decade in 2009, um, famous case, Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in jail for his role in a Ponzi scheme. He was just embezzling, stealing money from people is what it came down to. He would take their money, say he was going to reinvest it um, and make the people, money, uh, that they had given him, and he was just made off with, no pun intended, right? Bernie Madoff made off with, uh, you know, millions and tens of millions of dollars of other people's money. And so that's a Ponzi scheme when you do something like that, and he will be in prison the rest of his life. Of course, that wasn't such a big deal because of the magnitude and scope of how much money he had swindled from people. And then in 2009, the world is shocked when Michael Jackson dies, the king of pop. He was in England and London rehearsing. He was going to do a bunch of shows and kind of a new tour that he was going on, and he passed away. And much has been made of that over the years. Was there foul play involved? Did his doctor give him the wrong medications, too much of a medication? Whatever it was. But Michael Jackson passes away, and the music world is in mourning. And then General Motors files for bankruptcy. Uh, they weren't selling enough vehicles. They had to lay off a bunch of their staff, and this was a crisis, right? A major car manufacturer in the U.S. We basically have two, right? Ford and GM, and GM was going under. And so, part of this, and I don't know every detail surrounding this, and no one probably does, but part of it is for years and years, the American car companies had just kind of rested on their laurels and said, people will always buy American. We have good products; they'll buy our products. Well, what had happened was, especially the Japanese car makers, Toyota and Honda and Nissan and so forth, uh, their cars were reliable, extremely reliable. Their engines ran for 200,000 miles or more, and they had great reviews, great track records, and loyal customers. And so, of course, a lot of Americans were buying foreign made, Japanese and German, and so less people were buying American made, and you saw the effects is that GM has to file for bankruptcy. Now, the US government will go in and bail them out and allow them to retain, much of their workforce, but as a result of that, the US government then had an ownership stake in General Motors, which anytime you have government owning or partially owning major corporations and businesses, it's a pretty interesting and can be a pretty dangerous thing. So, but this is what had to happen, they said, in order to save GM. So that's what occurred. And here's Michael Jackson. There's his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And yeah, I mean, people were in mourning. It was almost like Elvis had died. It was just crazy. People were um, devastated. But Michael Jackson, I think, I've mentioned this before on some of my other presentations, my rock and roll one, especially from the 1980s. I think Michael Jackson, he's one of the three mega superstars that the music world has seen, in the last 70 years. I think with Elvis and the Beatles, he's the third. And when he died, it definitely it shook the music world, and it was definitely the death of a legend. And then GM, here you go. General Motors declares bankruptcy, and we all know the GM logos, and they make a variety of vehicles, cars and trucks, and SUVs and so forth. But um, yeah, it was pretty crazy when they said, "Hey, we're going under. We need help." So the U.S. government swooped in and helped them out. But there's your 2000s. So hopefully that was informative and you learned something.